So I have a little bit of personal guilt, and then so many of the students to feel like our voices weren't being heard. We had protests, we had marches, we had petitions. There were referenda in many different schools that all passed overwhelmingly supporting full divestment.
For the students who you met right there, for kids like him, this is an issue right now where they are facing this 2 p.m. deadline, and they're starting to separate themselves into different groups. The students who are going to be willing to risk arrest, suspension, other issues with the school, and students who are going to start packing their belongings, who say that they want to finish this semester in good standing, Jose. So we will be on campus as 2 p.m. nears, and we'll be able to observe what happens. But it is all the talk here right now on campus as students try to figure out how do they continue their protests under this pressure from the administration, Jose.
Antonio, do we know how the commencement ceremony is going to be affected by this?
Well, what we've been assured by the administration is that commencement is going to go forward as planned. And they mention in their notes that they will try to give students an alternative area to hold a protest at that time. But the students who are the core group, just like the gentleman you just heard from right there, there's some resistance to moving to the site where the university wants them to go. And so the question is, will they really get out of this encampment? Will they really disperse before we get closer to that date? The university seems to think they're going to be able to push forward and continue plans as they've always been. They are really, in particular, concerned about students, many of whom are part of this group, this graduating class, who didn't get to have their high school graduation. And they're starting to hear from parents, community members who want to make sure that their kids get that symbolic moment, those photographs, that memory. And that seems to be what the school is concerned about as this inches closer. And we'll see what ends up happening to the protesters and where they land, Jose.
Antonio Hilton, thank you so very much. Appreciate it. And joining us now from Columbia's campus as well, Bruce Robbins, a professor at Columbia University. Professor, it's great seeing you. I thank you for your time. You visited
Thanks for having me.
This encampment of students protesting the war at your university. How do you see it?
Well, I admire the students enormously. I admire their sentiments and their courage. Frankly, I'm very disappointed in the administration. I think it's very short-sighted for them not, at the very, very least. I mean, I think they should be considering divestment more seriously. If they saw themselves in history, they would be thinking about South Africa and how clearly it was a good thing. History has judged it to be a good thing to divest from a white supremacist state. The slaughter in Gaza certainly stacks up pretty well against the white supremacy of South Africa. I think the students are right to ask for divestment. If the university can't give the students everything they want, they could do something symbolically very powerful by saying, we will divest, for example, from X country, Y company, which are, say, providing arms and helping very, very directly in the slaughter in Gaza. There are things the university could do if they were more statesmanlike, if they had more of a sense of where they belong in history, a sense that there are more important things. History will judge. There are more important things than some nice graduation pictures.
And so I know that you've written about some of the ways you feel the university's president has mishandled these demonstrations. What are your main criticisms?
Well, my main criticism is that the president called in the police. I think almost all of the faculty is united in feeling that. And many, many people, probably as many people on the faculty, are united in thinking that in her testimony before the House of Representatives, she didn't stand up for the principles of the university. She really just was craven, and so were the trustees who testified with her. So the university generally did not show its best side in either of those ways.
What do you see as principles, those principles that you think were violated by the president and the board of trustees? What were those principles violated?
Well, for example, to tell the House of Representatives that one faculty member would never teach at Columbia again. To tell the House, the president doesn't have the authority to decide any such thing. to reveal the information about an investigation that was supposedly happening of another professor, when it appears there was no such investigation. But in any case, if there were an investigation, it would be anonymous. So transparency, shared governance is important because you don't call in the police without asking the faculty senate. The faculty senate was created after 1968 exactly to avoid this kind of situation. The president doesn't seem to be aware that she had an obligation to consult the faculty, and we on the faculty think that she did.
And Professor, just your thoughts on, and maybe just a broader conversation about freedom of speech, freedom from intimidation. We have seen pictures and videos of chants inside the Columbia University campus that many would consider anti-Semitic, racist, and hateful.
Sorry.
Where do you think, Professor? Oh, you all right?
I'm sorry. It was a phone call. I just had to hang up.
Okay, that's all right. Live TV has everything, and I just want your thoughts, if you would, about freedom of expression, freedom from intimidation. Some pictures that we have seen from inside that encampment show signs and some chants that many would consider offensive, intimidating, anti-Semitic. Where do you think, Professor, the line should be between free speech and the freedom to protest and intimidation, lack of respect for others' perspectives, opinions, or even religion?
Yeah, you pose a very, very complicated question. I recognize that it is a complicated question. I think intimidation is a very strong word. And much of what has been called intimidation, the sorts of things that have been called in question as endangering the safety of Jewish students. I mean, I say this as a Jew on campus. It's really been a matter of making people feel uncomfortable rather than intimidating or in any way threatening people yeah, it hasn't really been threatening. I'm sorry, the words are failing me. So yes, it's a genuine question. What I have thought, and I've said a couple of other times before, is that universities have the right, even an obligation, to create speech codes and to sustain speech codes on campus, which are different from what is constitutionally available outside campus in the United States. So, for example, I do not think that genocidal discourse should be permissible on campus because that would genuinely be intimidating for anybody targeted by that discourse. But when I say that, when I feel it, and I do feel it as somebody who has been verbally and physically assaulted by anti-Semites, I just don't think there has been any genocidal talk at this encampment. I realize, all right, the exception would be the one thing that everybody has heard about, the young man who said that Zionists didn't have the right to live. He said this 3 months before the encampment. He apologized for it afterwards. It was not representative of the things that I have heard in the encampment.
And I got to tell you, that's such an important. It's an important conversation. I am so glad that you are with us this morning to give your perspective. It's a very important perspective, Professor. I do think, and for a future conversation, this whole concept of that you can, for example, as a human being, say that other human beings should not have the right to live, to exist, and that an apology for that is an interesting concept, and I think it's one that I'd like to have with you going forward. But Professor, I am very grateful for your time today.
I'm sorry, it was a grotesque statement. I have to get that in there, and it's grotesque and unrepresentative.
Yeah, and I mean, how you then say, "I'm sorry that I said that." You know, anyway.
Apologies don't work, Professor, anyway.
That's true. Hey, listen, it's been great chatting with you. I hope to continue our conversation going forward. Appreciate it.
That would be great. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you. Bruce Robbins, I appreciate it. And while those protests continue across the U.S., overseas, Israel is concerned the International Criminal Court may soon issue arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and other senior military leaders, according to an Israeli official. The warrants could stem from the ICC's investigation into the current war in Gaza, which was first reported by the New York Times, citing 5 Israeli and foreign officials. But the court has also been investigating conflicts between Israel and Hamas going back to 2014. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is now in Saudi Arabia, where he is meeting with leaders in the region amid stalled hostage and ceasefire negotiations. He addressed Netanyahu's plan to push into the southern Gaza city of Rafah.
We've said clearly and for some time now on Rafah that in the absence of a plan to ensure that civilians will not be harmed, we can't support a major military operation in Rafah. And we have not yet seen a plan that gives us confidence that civilians can be effectively protected.
NBC's Raf Sanchez is following all the developments from Tel Aviv. Raf, there is a lot going on today. What's the latest?
There is a real sense of urgency right now about getting to a ceasefire deal before the start of Israel's threatened offensive in the city of Rafah. An Israeli official tells NBC News the current proposal on the table would see the release of 33 hostages in the first stage of a deal in exchange for a temporary ceasefire and the release of Palestinian prisoners. Now, those hostages would be from the so-called humanitarian category. So that is women, children, the elderly, people with serious medical conditions. The number 33 is down from the previous number of 40 because Hamas has indicated it may not have 40 living hostages who fit that criteria. There is a delegation of Hamas officials in Cairo today speaking to Egyptian mediators. An Israeli official tells me an Israeli team may head to the Egyptian capital tomorrow, depending on the progress. And Secretary of State Blinken is in Saudi Arabia. Earlier today, he described the offer on the table as incredibly generous to Hamas, urging the militant group to go ahead and to accept it. Hamas over the weekend releasing another hostage video, once again showing an American-Israeli hostage, this time Keith Siegel. He is the oldest American hostage still in captivity. Hamas is framing this as a gesture of goodwill, a sign it is willing to negotiate. The Israeli government seems at this point internally divided over the prospects of this deal. Some of the far-right members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet saying Israel should focus on attacking Rafah, but some of the more moderate members, including War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz, saying the priority right now needs to be bringing the hostages home and that Rafah can wait. Separately, an Israeli official tells NBC News Israel is deeply concerned that potentially as early as this week, the International Criminal Court may issue arrest warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli defense minister, and senior Israeli military officials. This official says Israel